Welcome to West Film. We bring you the best movie recaps, reviews, ending explained videos, and hidden details from your favorite films. If you love great movies, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Now grab some popcorn, and let's jump into today's movie. Doug is stunned all over again to see Griff at the party. Griff raises a toast, reminiscing about how the four of them once dreamed of becoming filmmakers, then unveils an old tape they made together years ago. When it plays, the footage turns out to be a crude, gory, amateur horror film full of over-the-top acting and profanity. It's also obvious from the video that Griff and Claire were once romantically involved. The group spends the night laughing and reliving the past. The next morning, over breakfast, they talk about their childhood love of Anaconda, and that's when Griff drops his bombshell. He claims to have bought the rights to the franchise. Even more shocking, he wants all of them to remake the movie together. He and Claire will star, Kenny will handle the camera, and Doug will direct. Doug immediately shoots the idea down, pointing out that he has a family and a steady job. Kenny eagerly agrees, while Claire hesitates but is eventually talked into it by Griff. Doug refuses to budge until later that night, when he finds Charlie still watching their old tape. Maya gently encourages Doug to take a chance and chase his passion. Doug watches one of his latest wedding video edits and realizes just how empty the work feels. Fed up, he drives straight to Griff's place and agrees to make the movie. Doug lays out what they'll need: a trip to the Amazon, a private boat, and even a real anaconda. The initial budget estimate comes to $2 million, but their loan application only gets approved for $9,000. After cutting every corner they can, they manage to bring the budget down to $47,000. They talk about giving the story some emotional depth. Doug suggests leaning into generational trauma, believing audiences connect strongly with that kind of theme. He writes a script and reads it aloud to the group, and everyone agrees it's solid. Kenny apologizes to Doug for something from the past. Doug explains that Kenny once showed up drunk to a wedding shoot and destroyed a cake, forcing Doug to fire him. Kenny insists he's sober now, admitting he only drinks the occasional beer. Doug accepts the apology and promises to give him another chance. On the day they're set to leave, Charlie gives Doug a homemade Oscar statue for good luck. Back in the jungle, Anna is still hiding from a mysterious pursuer and eventually makes her way to a dock. Doug and the team arrive at that same location. Doug casually explains that anacondas can stay submerged for days, waiting patiently before ambushing and crushing their prey. Suddenly, an eerie stranger appears behind them and confirms Doug's claim, adding that his own grandmother died exactly that way. Kenny asks who he is. The man calmly introduces himself as Santiago, their snake handler, and leads the group to meet the anaconda. He explains that when he found the snake, It was barely alive after ingesting mercury dumped by illegal gold miners. He claims he nursed the creature back from the brink of death and formed a deep bond with it. To him, the snake is family, and he's named it Dada. Santiago also warns that legend speaks of even larger anacondas lurking deeper in the jungle. Elsewhere, Anna ducks into a small cafe. Copyright. But the two men tracking her soon show up. The two, trying to stay calm, she spots a boat tied up outside along with a set of keys nearby. Thinking fast, she steals the keys and slips away. Back at the dock, Griff whispers to Claire that Santiago seems unstable. Claire points out that all of them quit their normal lives to chase a childhood fantasy about making an Anaconda movie, so none of them are exactly the picture of normal either. Anna suddenly reappears and tells the group she booked the boat through her father, but he's now hospitalized, which means she has to cancel the trip and refund their money. The crew is stunned. Doug pleads with her, explaining how much this project means to them and how long they've waited to chase this dream. When she spots the two men closing in, Anna changes her mind and agrees to take them after all. They board the boat and she sets off down the river. One of the pursuers immediately questions the dockmaster, asking for a list of boats that left within the last half hour. The next morning, the crew stops at a remote spot and begins filming. Claire plays a scientist whose family was wiped out by a legendary anaconda. She hires a seasoned snake tracker, played by Griff, to hunt the creature down. During a break, Griff admits to Doug that the two of them once planned to move to Los Angeles together to break into the film industry, but he lost his nerve at the last moment. Santiago keeps assisting with the shoot, offering realistic tips about snake behavior and movement. It's revealed that Griff and Claire dated in high school, and their lingering chemistry is obvious. They flirt constantly and seem drawn to each other. Griff says this trip feels like the happiest moment of his life and wishes they'd reunited sooner. That evening, everyone sits down for dinner. Griff proposes a change to the script. Instead of giving the villain a redemption moment, Claire's character should headbutt him at the end. Claire isn't impressed, but the others laugh and support the idea. Griff demonstrates the move. Doug insists he can do it better and tries his own version. Claire then steps in and shows she can outdo them both. The moment turns into a playful competition, much to Anna's annoyance. Late that night, while everyone sleeps, the snake escapes its enclosure. It silently slithers toward Griff, who nearly panics only to realize it's hunting a bird, not him. The next morning, Griff confronts Kenny about hiring a handler without proper credentials. Santiago insists the escape was a simple mistake and claims he's repaired the crate. He assures the murder responds only to him and there's no danger. Meanwhile, Anna studies her map, trying to work out how much farther she has to travel to reach her real destination. Filming resumes, this time involving close interaction with the snake. Griff is visibly terrified and struggles to perform. He asks Doug to cut, but Doug refuses, insisting everything is under control. They try again. The snake edges closer. Griff panics and begs for the scene to stop, but Doug, fully absorbed in directing, doesn't react. In sheer terror, Griff kicks the snake overboard, and it falls directly into the spinning propeller, torn apart instantly. Santiago collapses in shock. Kenny breaks down in tears. Griff angrily insists the snake was about to kill him. Santiago explodes, screaming that Griff has murdered his child, and demands he leave. Doug agrees that separation is for the best. Santiago later performs a funeral ritual for Ada, cremating what's left of the snake. Elsewhere, one of the pursuing men contacts his employer to report that he's found Anna's boat. Standing near the water, he senses movement, looks, and sees nothing. A moment later, a massive anaconda drags him under. Griff tries to apologize to Santiago, who's still furious and orders him away. Griff says he understands grief, revealing that he's lost someone important too, and offers Santiago a beer, which Santiago washes down with his medication. Santiago starts to calm down. Griff opens up about his career, explaining that after 4 seasons on a TV show, he was fired over something trivial. Santiago tells him he deserves better and calls him a star. He suggests that finishing the movie could revive Griff's career, promises to find another snake, and asks Griff to come with him. They head into the swamp. Every sound terrifies Griff, and he admits this was a terrible idea. Santiago claims he can sense a snake nearby. They feel vibrations in the water and move closer, unaware that an enormous anaconda is already stalking them. Griff loses sight of Santiago and, instead of searching for him, panics and runs back toward the boat. Santiago lights a flare to announce himself, but the giant anaconda coils around him and drags him under. Griff rushes back to Doug and explains what happened. Trying to convince himself everything's fine, he says Santiago is experienced and probably okay, and suggests waiting a couple of hours before organizing a search. Kenny finds Santiago's medication and pockets it without thinking. After time passes, Claire and Doug agree they can't wait any longer and decide they have to go look for Santiago. Kenny, meanwhile, is completely out of it, rambling incoherently under the influence of the pills. Doug realizes they're wasting precious time and pushes everyone to move. They trek deeper into the jungle and come across a rusted, abandoned van. At the same time, one of the pursuers boards Anna's boat and finds it deserted. He orders his crew to fan out into the forest and search for her. The film crew cautiously climbs inside the van. Suddenly, they hear a slow, wet, sliding sound scraping against the metal. Moments later, Santiago's lifeless body is dumped onto the ground in front of them. Panic spreads, and from the shadows, the massive anaconda finally reveals itself. Anna screams for them to start the van before the snake crushes it. Griff tries the key, but the engine won't turn over. Kenny, barely coherent, mutters that the battery is split-charged and needs reconnecting, but admits he's too messed up to fix it. Doug explodes, accusing Kenny of screwing things up again, and with no other option, pops the hood and works on the wiring himself. After a tense few seconds, he manages to reconnect the battery. Griff turns the ignition, the engine roars to life just as the anaconda lunges, and they peel away at full speed. Doug barely making it back inside before the door slams shut. Not long after, a group of bikers starts chasing them. Kenny suggests stopping to ask for help, but Anna desperately tells them to keep driving, explaining that the men are illegal miners who control parts of the jungle and that anyone who wanders into their territory disappears. Anna finds a gun in the van and, as the bikers close in, calmly leans out and shoots them one by one, knocking each rider off his bike. They eventually reach the dock in their boat, but instead of getting on board, Anna suddenly tries to leave. Before they can react, a man steps out and holds them at gunpoint, demanding to know where Anna is. Claire pretends she has no idea what he's talking about. Anna sneaks up behind him and knocks him out, and they rush onto the boat and escape. Once they're safe, Anna studies her map and explains there's a small airstrip about a day away by river. She offers to take them there so they can get home safely. Doug agrees and announces the movie is over. Griff is crushed, but Doug insists they all have families and that no film is worth dying for. After some back and forth, Griff reluctantly accepts it. That night, Doug sits alone, scribbling in his notebook, when inspiration strikes. The next morning, he gathers everyone for an emergency meeting and pitches a new version of the movie. Instead of focusing solely on the snake, the couple will encounter a mysterious warrior who exposes illegal gold miners, and the team will join forces with this warrior to take down the real villains. Griff loves the idea, calling it Oscar-worthy, and everyone agrees to keep filming. Kenny volunteers to play their warrior, but Doug chooses Anna instead. She delivers an intense, commanding performance that completely impresses him. Griff starts to feel sidelined, complaining that the story now revolves too much around Anna and makes the rest of their characters feel pointless. Doug brushes off the concern, clearly mesmerized by Anna, and tells everyone else to take the day off. Claire can't believe they're being dismissed from their own project. Griff bitterly replies that this is just how the industry works. Privately, he asks Claire if she ever wonders what her life could have been. She says she does, but adds that at least Griff chased his dreams instead of settling the way she did. Griff snaps back that chasing dreams hasn't exactly brought him success. The next morning, Doug tries calling Griff, but Griff refuses to come out, saying he won't shoot anymore because Anna has hijacked the project. He mocks Doug's wedding business, but their argument is interrupted by another boat approaching. Doug asks what's going on, and a woman aboard says they've officially purchased the rights to Anaconda and are preparing a reboot of their own. Everyone stares at Griff. He fumbles, claiming he didn't realize the legal details. Doug finally loses his temper, accusing Griff of lying to manipulate them into coming. Griff snaps back that if he told the truth, none of them would have shown up, and brings up how Doug once promised to move to Los Angeles with him but backed out at the last moment. Doug's had enough and fires him on the spot. Furious and hurt, Griff jumps onto a speedboat and takes off. Claire begs him to stop. He says he's going to find the real movie crew and warn them about the snake. Claire warns him there's an actual monster in the river, but he ignores her. After a long trip, Griff reaches the rival productions camp only to find it destroyed. He calls out for survivors. A terrified woman stumbles out of the trees screaming, and Griff tries to reassure her, promising to save Hero, but before he can move, the giant Anaconda bursts out and swallows her whole. Horrified, Griff flees back to his boat. Back with the group, Anna announces she's found the next filming location. Kenny insists they can't continue without Griff and that they need to go after him. Without warning, Anna pulls a gun and orders everyone off the boat. They're stunned but comply, and soon one of the armed men joins them and escorts them deeper into the jungle. Griff, meanwhile, returns to the boat, finds it empty, and notices a strange speedboat nearby with a sniper inside. Anna leads the group to a hidden clearing and forces them to retrieve heavy sacks, ordering them to carry the bags back toward the boat. Doug asks what's inside, and when he opens one, he finds it filled with gold. The truth clicks. Anna is an illegal gold smuggler. Suddenly the armed man steps forward and holds her at gunpoint. She drops her weapon, and he reveals that she runs one of the largest gold smuggling operations in Brazil, tossing her handcuffs and ordering her to put them on. From a distance, Griff sees the man and assumes he's the villain. He shoots him in the leg, striking a heroic pose as he rushes forward, but the group screams that the man is actually a police officer trying to save them. Anna quickly grabs the fallen gun and turns it on the group. The wounded officer makes one last attempt to stop her, but she shoots him without hesitation, then turns the gun on Claire and prepares to fire. Claire reacts fast, grabbing the sniper rifle and slamming it into Anna with a powerful headbutt. She aims the weapon at Anna, but Anna smirks, confident Claire doesn't have it in her to pull the trigger. Anna lunges to fight back only to be suddenly seized and swallowed whole by the massive Anaconda. Stunned, the group drops to the ground, trying to figure out what to do next. Moments later, Doug screams in pain. A tarantula has bitten him. He panics, and Kenny insists the venom needs to be neutralized by urinating on the wound. Griff says he physically can't go. Claire refuses to undress in front of everyone. That leaves Kenny, who admits he's terrified of peeing in public. Doug tells him this is his chance to redeem himself after all his past mistakes, and with the group's encouragement, Kenny finally pushes past his fear and relieves himself on the bite. They move on. As they walk, Doug admits he's always envied Griff for having the courage to chase his dreams. Before Griff can respond, the Anaconda bursts out of the foliage and snatches Doug, dragging him into the jungle. Griff insists they have to save him, but Claire argues that staying will only get them all killed. Griff breaks down, blaming himself for everything. And Clara reminds him that they all chose to come here, none of this is on him alone. Kenny claims he knows a possible escape route but points out the terrain is too open, leaving them exposed from every direction. Claire suggests creating a distraction. Suddenly they hear movement nearby. Griff stumbles onto Doug's body lying beside a wild boar. Kenny checks Doug's pulse and sadly declares him dead, then gets an idea. They can use the body as bait. If the snake goes for him, it'll be occupied long enough for the rest of them to escape. With heavy hearts, they agree, tying Doug's body in an open clearing. Kenny stuffs a dead squirrel into his mouth, claiming it'll attract the snake faster, and the group runs as the anaconda slithers after them. Griff turns back for one last look at his friend and Doug suddenly gasps. He isn't dead. Kenny misread the pulse. They scream at him to run as the anaconda charges. Doug sprints for his life. Chaos erupts when a wild boar also comes charging through the clearing, and the anaconda diverts to devour the pig instead. Using the distraction, the group escapes into the trees. Breathing hard, Griff admits he was wrong about everything. He just wanted to reconnect with his friends. Doug admits the same, then angrily asks who put a dead squirrel in his mouth. Kenny tries to pretend it was a group decision, but Doug knows better. They eventually reach the rival productions campsite, only to find it destroyed. Griff picks up a walkie-talkie and hears static, then a faint voice. Before they can respond, a smaller snake lunges at them and is shot dead. A man steps out of the darkness, firing his weapon at its ice cube. He explains his crew was attacked by the giant snake but that he managed to escape, and assures them Jennifer and Eric are alive. He mentions his team had been setting up explosives for special effects before everything went wrong, and Doug realizes they could use those explosives to kill the anaconda. Kenny says he knows how to operate the system. Before Ice Cube leaves to search for Lopez, Kenny asks for a photo, which he actually agrees to, and hands them a gun on his way out. They put together a plan. Griff will handle the detonator, Claire will power up the generators, Kenny will monitor the system, and Doug will drive a golf cart to lure Snake toward the explosives. The plan goes into motion. Doug floors the cart as the anaconda barrels after him. Suddenly Kenny loses the signal, and they scramble to find the right switch as the snake closes in. Griff presses the detonator. Nothing happens. Kenny notices a loose cable and quickly reconnects it, and the explosives ignite, setting the anaconda ablaze. They cheer, until the burning snake keeps moving. The golf cart gets stuck in thick mud. They abandon it and run, reaching a dead end as the snake approaches. Griff steps forward, raises his gun, and fires at nearby gasoline barrels. A massive explosion erupts, tearing the anaconda apart. Everyone exhales in relief, until the severed head lunges toward Griff. Doug leaps in front of him and stabs the creature through the skull with the homemade Oscar statue Charlie gave him. The anaconda is finally dead. The survivors walk away together. Later, their finished movie screens in their hometown to thunderous applause. Griff and Claire start dating and eventually marry, and Doug films their wedding. Griff is offered his old television role back. Kenny conquers his fear of public urination. One day, Doug hears a knock at his door and opens it to find Jennifer Lopez. She tells him she watched their little movie and loved it, and wants him to write and direct a new Anaconda reboot. Far away in the jungle, Santiago suddenly wakes up and screams, he's still alive. Analysis: what if your favorite childhood monster movie wasn't just remade, but reimagined as a twisted joke about remakes themselves? What if a group of ordinary people decided to recreate a cult classic, only to discover that the nightmare they're trying to film is very real? Anaconda 2025 isn't just another giant snake movie. It's not a simple reboot. It's not a straightforward remake, and it's definitely not what most people expected. The film blends comedy, adventure, and survival horror into a strange but fascinating mix, where nostalgia collides with midlife crisis and filmmaking itself becomes part of the danger. On the surface it looks ridiculous. Paul Rudd, Jack Black, a jungle, a giant snake here, but underneath the humor is a story about people desperately chasing meaning, clinging to the past, and finding out what happens when fantasy slams headfirst into brutal reality. Some viewers see Anaconda 2025 as a playful love letter to the original, others see it as a chaotic experiment that either works brilliantly or falls apart completely. So today we're diving into everything: the story, the themes, the hidden meanings, the ending, the callbacks, and whether this strange remake deserves your time. Because whether you love it, hate it, or aren't sure what to think, Anaconda 2025 is one of the most unusual creature films in recent years, and by the end, you'll know exactly what kind of monster this movie really is. Released in 2025, Anaconda arrives with a mission that instantly sets it apart from most remakes. Instead of simply retelling the story, it asks a bold question: what if people tried to remake Anaconda inside an Anaconda movie? Directed by Tom Gormican, the film stars Paul Rudd and Jack Black as two lifelong friends stuck in the uncomfortable space between who they were and who they've become. They're not heroes, not explorers, not trained survivalists, are just ordinary men chasing an impossible dream. The ensemble cast also includes Thandai Newton, Stephen Zahn, Daniela Melchior, and Selton Mello, each bringing their own motivations, frustrations, and emotional baggage into the jungle. The story is set deep in the Amazon rainforest, a place that has long symbolized mystery, danger, and humanity's insignificance in the face of nature. But unlike traditional creature features, the premise isn't simply people go into jungle, monster hunts them. Instead, a group of friends travels into the rainforest to make a low-budget remake of the original Anaconda, hoping to recapture the excitement of their youth, prove they still matter, and maybe fix what feels broken inside them by creating something big. No spoilers, no plot twists, just this: what begins as a ridiculous filmmaking adventure slowly turns into a genuine survival nightmare, because while they're pretending to make a monster movie, something in the jungle isn't pretending. And once reality takes over, there are no retakes, no safety nets, only instinct, fear, and the terrifying realization that they've wandered into a story far more dangerous than the one they planned to tell. At first glance, Anaconda 2025 looks like a comedy of jokes, absurd situations, self-aware humor. But that's only the outer skin. Underneath, the movie is operating on three genre layers at once. First, it's a comedy, not slapstick for the sake of noise, but awkward, uncomfortable humor rooted in human insecurity. These characters aren't funny because they're clever, they're funny because they're desperate. Second, it's an adventure film, a journey into an environment that doesn't care about dreams, talent, or nostalgia. The jungle isn't just a backdrop, it's an obstacle, a pressure cooker, a slow test of endurance. Third, it becomes survival horror, not jump scare driven, not gore obsessed, but tension based, built on anticipation, uncertainty, and the feeling that something massive is out there, watching and waiting. But the film's most important layer isn't genre, it's theme. At its core, Anaconda 2025 is about people stuck in the past, adults who peaked emotionally decades ago, who still define themselves by who they used to be, who believe recreating an old memory will somehow restore meaning to their lives. The movie quietly explores midlife dissatisfaction, the fear of irrelevance, the terror of realizing time doesn't stop. The snake isn't just a monster, it's a metaphor, a physical embodiment of reality closing in. The more the characters avoid confronting their real problems, the closer the danger gets. Emotionally, the film walks a tightrope. It wants you to laugh, then feel uneasy, then slowly realize you're watching a comedy about people who are genuinely lost. Its target audience isn't just horror fans or comedy lovers, so it's aimed at anyone who's ever wondered, is this all my life is going to be? Because beneath the jokes, beneath the snake, beneath the chaos, Anaconda 2025 is really about identity, and about what happens when the version of yourself you cling to no longer exists. The story doesn't begin with a monster, it begins with disappointment. Doug and Griff are two lifelong friends drifting through adulthood. Their careers feel empty, their ambitions distant, their younger, fearless selves like strangers. They spend their days talking about the past, about the movie they loved, about how things used to feel, about who they thought they'd become. And one reckless idea changes everything. Instead of accepting that those days are gone, they decide to chase them. They'll make their own version of Anaconda, not professionally, not carefully, but passionately. They gather a small, mismatched crew, some hopeful, some skeptical, some clearly for the wrong reasons, but all sharing one thing: they want this to mean something. The group heads into the rainforest armed with cameras, half-baked plans, and unearned confidence. At first the jungle feels like an inconvenience: heat, mud, equipment problems, arguments, all of it becoming content, every setback becoming part of the movie. They laugh, they improvise, they convince themselves they're in control. Then small details start to feel wrong. Animals behave strangely, local warnings get brushed aside. Uncomfortable silences replace the jokes. What once felt like an adventure starts to feel like intrusion. Their first real brush with danger isn't spectacular, it's subtle, a shadow that doesn't make sense, a sound that doesn't belong, a moment that lingers too long. Doubt creeps in, but ego is louder than instinct, so they push forward, because quitting would mean admitting failure, and turning back would mean admitting they're chasing ghosts. When the snake finally reveals itself, the illusion shatters. This isn't a movie monster, isn't a special effect, it's a massive, living predator, and it isn't amused by their presence. Panic replaces creativity. Plans collapse. Friendships fracture under the pressure. Every decision now carries weight. Every mistake has consequences. The jungle stops being scenery and becomes a maze, a trap, a hunting ground. Some characters try to hold on to control, others freeze, others break. The group slowly realizes something horrifying. They didn't come here to make a movie, they came here to prove they still mattered, and now they're paying for that need. The story shifts from "can we finish this film?" to a much simpler question: can we survive? What follows is a desperate struggle between people who barely understand themselves and a creature perfectly built to kill. No hero speeches, no grand strategies, just fear, instinct, and the fragile hope that they might make it out of the jungle alive. By the final act, nothing about this journey feels like a joke anymore. The characters are exhausted, injured, emotionally stripped bare. The jungle has stripped away everything superficial, leaving only who they truly are underneath. The final confrontation with the Anaconda isn't framed as a triumphant boss battle, it's messy, chaotic, desperate. There's no master plan, no perfectly executed strategy, just people reacting, improvising, making split-second choices based on survival instinct. And that's the point. This movie was never really about killing the monster. It was about facing reality. When the snake is finally dealt with, it doesn't feel like victory, it feels like escape, like relief. The characters don't stand taller or feel powerful, they feel small, humbled, changed. Doug and Griff, the two friends who started this whole disaster, finally confront the truth they'd been running from. They weren't trying to make a movie, they were trying to rewind time, to become younger versions of themselves. And the jungle showed them something brutal: you can't live in the past, and you can't rebuild your identity out of nostalgia. The ending suggests that survival itself becomes their real achievement, and not fame, not recognition, not finishing the film, just making it out alive. Symbolically, the Anaconda represents the consequences of denial. The longer they avoided their personal emptiness, the bigger the danger grew. Once they stopped pretending, stop performing, stop chasing fantasy, escape becomes possible. The film deliberately leaves the future open. There are no perfect life transformations, no tidy resolutions, because growth isn't cinematic, it's quiet, uncomfortable, ongoing. Some viewers read the ending as hopeful, others as bittersweet, but both readings share one truth: the characters didn't find the movie they were searching for. They found themselves. And sometimes that's far more terrifying than any monster on the surface. Anaconda 2025 plays like chaos, but beneath the noise it's quietly packed with small details that deepen its meaning. One of the most consistent visual motifs is mirrors and reflections, shiny camera lenses, water surfaces, metal equipment cases. Characters are frequently framed alongside reflections, suggesting they're constantly confronted with versions of themselves, who they are versus who they pretend to be. Another subtle thread lies in how often the characters talk about controlling the shoot, the schedule, the story, yet the jungle is filmed in wide, overwhelming shots that make the humans look tiny and powerless. It's a visual reinforcement of the idea that they never had control, not over nature, not over their lives, not even over their own self-image. There are also playful callbacks to the original Anaconda, background props resembling classic weapons, camera angles that mimic iconic shots, even throwaway lines that echo dialogue from the 1997 film. But rather than using these purely as fan service, the movie reframes them as commentary, acknowledging nostalgia while quietly questioning it. Another clever bit of foreshadowing comes early on, a casual joke about how nothing ever goes according to plan in the jungle. It's played for laughs, but structurally, that line ends up describing the entire movie. Sound design carries meaning too. Before the snake is ever seen, low-frequency rumbles creep into the soundtrack, almost subconsciously. You don't notice them at first, but your body does, and it builds unease long before the danger becomes visible. Even the snake's camouflage isn't just a creature feature trick, it symbolizes unseen consequences. The problems you ignore and the fears you bury, they don't disappear, they just blend into the background until they're too close to escape. One of the most telling hidden details is how the group's filming equipment slowly breaks down and disappears by the final act. Almost nothing is left, visually suggesting their movie dream has been stripped away, leaving only survival and truth. These small touches turn Anaconda 2025 from simple monster entertainment into a layered story about denial, identity, and collapse. See a film that quietly asks how many people are walking through life pretending everything's fine while something massive waits in the shadows. Behind the chaos of Anaconda 2025 lies a production story almost as strange as the movie itself. It wasn't conceived as a standard reboot from the beginning. The filmmakers wanted something risky and self-aware, something that commented on the very idea of remakes rather than simply repeating one. Director Tom Gormican approached the project with a single guiding question: what if the remake knows it's a remake? That philosophy shaped every creative decision. Paul Rudd and Jack Black weren't cast to play action heroes, so they were cast to play ordinary men pretending to be heroes. Both actors leaned heavily into awkwardness, misplaced confidence, and overcompensation. The performances were intentionally imperfect, because polish would have betrayed the story. Several scenes were partly improvised, especially the moments of arguing, panic, and emotional confession. The goal wasn't polished dialogue but uncomfortable honesty. The production also avoided leaning solely on digital effects, practical creature elements or textures, movement rigs. Physical interaction points were used for close-up shots so actors could react to something tangible, even though the final snake would later be enhanced with CGI. That choice helps ground the horror and gives the creature's presence real weight. One interesting behind-the-scenes detail: the jungle environment was designed to feel progressively more hostile. Early scenes use brighter lighting and wider spacing. Later scenes grow darker, more cluttered, more claustrophobic, visually mirroring the group's mental collapse. There were reportedly deleted sequences leaning even harder into absurd comedy, including extended fake movie scenes where the characters try to act inside their own film, or most were cut to preserve pacing and tonal balance. The filmmakers also slipped in a surprise cameo tied to the original franchise, serving as both a nostalgic nod and a wink to longtime fans. Perhaps the most revealing fact is that the creators never wanted audiences to agree on whether the movie is brilliant or ridiculous. They expected division, and they designed it that way, because the film itself is about people chasing something questionable for reasons they barely understand. In that sense, the movie's existence mirrors its own story, a risky idea, a nostalgic impulse, a creative gamble. Just like its characters, the film jumps without knowing exactly how it will land. To understand Anaconda 2025, it helps to see what it's standing beside and what it's deliberately standing apart from. The original 1997 Anaconda was a straightforward creature thriller, simple structure, serious tone, a group enters the jungle, a monster hunts them, survival is the only goal. The 2025 version takes that skeleton and bends it. Instead of fearless explorers, we get insecure dreamers. Instead of professional hunters, we get people pretending to be filmmakers. Instead of pure terror, we get discomfort layered with humor. Where the original wanted you to fear the snake, the new version wants you to question the humans. In many ways, Anaconda 2025 shares more DNA with films like Tropic Thunder, where a movie about making a movie becomes the real story, or The Cabin in the Woods, which hides meta-commentary inside genre packaging rather than with traditional creature features like The Meg, Lake Placid, or Deep Blue Sea. Those films lean into spectacle, bigger teeth, bigger explosions, bigger body counts. Anaconda 2025 leans into discomfort, awkwardness, and emotional exposure. Where some creature movies ask how cool is the monster, this one quietly asks, why are these people even here? Compared with modern horror comedies, it sits somewhere between absurd and melancholic, and not as fast-paced as Shaun of the Dead, not as satirical as Scream, not as brutal as Evil Dead. It occupies an uncomfortable middle ground, and that seems intentional. What it does well, it gives its characters inner lives, and it refuses to treat nostalgia as sacred. What it does worse, it sacrifices momentum, risks tonal confusion, and demands patience. So whether someone prefers the 1997 original or the 2025 version really comes down to what they want. If they want straightforward monster action, the original still wins. If they want a strange, self-aware experiment, the remake offers something different and not safer, not cleaner, but braver. When Anaconda 2025 reached audiences, the reaction wasn't unified, it fractured. Some viewers walked out surprised, others confused, a smaller group genuinely impressed. This isn't the kind of movie that quietly blends into the background, it demands a reaction. Supporters praised its ambition, appreciating that it didn't simply copy the original, and enjoyed the performances, the awkward humor, and their willingness to look ridiculous in service of something stranger. Many called it refreshing, a creature film that actually tries to say something. Critics were more divided. Some admired the concept but felt the execution struggled, pointing to tonal whiplash, a comedy that sometimes undercuts the tension, horror that doesn't always linger long enough to fully land. Others argued that the film's refusal to commit to one lane is exactly the problem. Is it a comedy, a horror film, a satire, a character study? The movie answers yes, and that answer doesn't satisfy everyone. Among longtime fans of the original, reactions were just as split. Some appreciated the self-awareness, others wanted a more faithful, creature-driven experience with no irony and no commentary, just survival. What's clear is that Anaconda 2025 isn't a consensus film. It isn't universally loved, and it isn't universally hated. It occupies a strange middle ground, a polarizing experiment. Historically, movies like this often age differently, Some get dismissed at release and later re-evaluated as misunderstood risks, others just fade quietly. Whether Anaconda 2025 becomes cult-loved or quietly forgotten will depend on how future audiences respond to its oddness. But one thing's certain, safe movies rarely start conversations, and this one did. So what is Anaconda 2025? It isn't a masterpiece, and it isn't a disaster. It's something far more interesting, a risky experiment disguised as a creature feature. Its greatest strength is its willingness to be strange. It doesn't worship nostalgia, it questions it. It doesn't treat its characters as heroes, it exposes their flaws and lets them be insecure, selfish, confused, human. The performances carry much of the film's weight, especially the central duo, who make these broken, awkward men feel real even when the situations turn absurd. The film also deserves credit for attempting depth inside a genre that rarely chases it. But ambition has a cost. The pacing stumbles, the tone wobbles, some jokes miss, some tension evaporates too quickly. Not every idea lands, and the movie seems to know it. This isn't a film built to please everyone, it's built to challenge expectations. So who should watch Anaconda 2025? If you want a serious monster thriller, this probably isn't your movie. If you want mindless spectacle, you may be disappointed. But if you're open to genre-bending stories and meta-storytelling, movies that try something weird, it's worth your time, because even when it fails while reaching a end that matters. Anaconda 2025 may not give you the monster movie you expect, but it might give you a movie you didn't know you were willing to accept. And sometimes that's the most interesting kind of surprise. Reviews. Doug Mallister. Jack Black once dreamed of becoming a filmmaker, but life took him in a different direction. Instead of directing feature films, he now shoots wedding videos in Buffalo. As a kid, Doug spent his time making goofy homemade movies with his closest friends, Ronald Griffin Jr., Paul Rudd, Kenny Trent, Stephen Zahn, and Claire Simons, Thandai Newton. Years later, the group has drifted into less than ideal adult lives. Griff is barely scraping by as an actor in Hollywood, Doug feels stuck, and everyone seems quietly disappointed with how things turned out. During a surprise birthday visit, Griff drops a bombshell. He claims to have acquired the rights to the 1997 cult classic Anaconda and pitches the idea of making their own sequel. What follows is a strange but affectionate satire that lands somewhere between a goofy industry spoof and a heartfelt ode to creative friendship. It flirts with the kind of self-aware absurdity seen in films like Tropic Thunder, but with a softer, more nostalgic core. Paul Rudd being funny is hardly a revelation, and Jack Black doing comedy is expected, but here Black brings a bit more humanity than usual. He still leans into his trademark energy, yet there's sincerity beneath the chaos. Thandai Newton intentionally exaggerates her performance in a way that suits the meta-comedy, while Stephen Zahn feels slightly underused. It's easy to imagine him being even funnier with more screen time. A few extra running gags about scraping together a ridiculous micro-budget to a la Ghostbusters and its famous mortgage joke here would have added even more charm. Honestly, the movie almost begs for a more playful title, something like Not Anaconda or Anaconda, Rights Pending, because that's exactly the tone it operates in. The humor works best when the film embraces pure stupidity. The sillier it gets, the harder it lands. Watching Black and Rudd bounce off each other is inherently entertaining, and the ensemble chemistry does most of the heavy lifting. That said, there's a small sense of letdown, especially given the director's previous work. I was hoping for something sharper or more inventive. Instead, what we get is a knowingly dumb comedy that plays things fairly safe. If you walk in expecting clever satire, you may be underwhelmed. If you show up ready for a ridiculous, self-aware adventure, you'll probably have a good time. The story unfolds exactly as you'd expect, poking fun at reboots, remakes, and Hollywood's obsession with nostalgia. but rarely digging deeper than surface-level commentary. The plot is simple and predictable, though that seems intentional. What keeps it afloat is the cast. Rudd, Black, Zahn, and Newton form a likable group, and even the oversized CGI snake, yes, it's big, fits the intentionally cheesy vibe. Going in, I had mixed feelings. No one was exactly clamoring for another Anaconda-related project, and the idea of revisiting it felt unnecessary. Still, Paul Rudd's involvement convinced me to give it a fair shot. The result, a mildly amusing, occasionally clever, but ultimately disposable experience. There are laughs, a few fun ideas, and some meta touches that work, but nothing that truly sticks. Visually the film looks decent, and the jungle setting adds atmosphere, but the script feels thin and the jokes don't always hit as hard as they should. It's watchable but far from memorable. The original Anaconda remains a gloriously trashy cult favorite, followed by a string of forgettable sequels. This meta-reboot attempts to comment on that legacy while also celebrating it, and partially succeeds, mostly thanks to the charm of its performers. In the end, my advice is simple: don't expect too much. If you're in the mood for a silly, self-referential comedy powered by likable actors, you could certainly do worse. Just don't expect a modern classic. Enjoy it for what it is, have a few laughs, and move on. When Santiago introduces his trained snake for a key scene, Griff loses his nerve when the creature slithers too close and, in the chaos, accidentally kills it, flinging the body into the river, where it's shredded by the boat's propeller. With their snake movie now snakeless, the team reluctantly agrees they'll have to venture into the jungle to find a replacement. Their nighttime trek through the rainforest quickly turns terrifying when a colossal anaconda ambushes them, weaving through the group with ease. Around this time, Doug decides to expand the script by giving Anne a bigger role after she proves she can handle herself in a shift that irritates Griff, who feels his character is being sidelined. Things get even messier when the group crosses paths with a professional Sony film crew also shooting an Anaconda remake. Doug confronts Griff, who finally admits he never actually secured the rights to the franchise. After a heated argument, Griff abandons his friends and tries to join the rival production, only to find their boat destroyed and their set deserted, with evidence that the Anaconda has slaughtered much of the cast and crew. Back with the main group, Anna admits she's an illegal gold miner fleeing from the authorities. She's eventually caught by Paolo, a police officer who's been tracking her, but Griff suddenly returns and shoots Paolo in the leg, mistakenly assuming he's a criminal. Anna finishes the officer off, then takes the group hostage and forces them to collect gold for her. Before she can go any further, the Anaconda strikes again, coiling around her and crushing her beneath the water. As the survivors try to escape the jungle, tragedy strikes when Doug is swallowed whole by the giant snake. Later, Kenny, Griff, and Claire stumble on his motionless body and assume he's dead. Desperate, they use him as bait, covering him with a dead boar and placing a rat in his mouth to attract the creature. At the last possible moment, Doug regains consciousness and narrowly avoids being eaten a second time. The group makes its way back to the ruined film set, where they encounter Ice Cube playing himself for one of the stars attached to the studio remake. He helps fend off the snake and supplies them with weapons before leaving to search for any remaining survivors. A plan involving pyrotechnics fails, but in a final stand, Griff detonates propane tanks with a flare gun, and Doug lands the finishing blow to the Anaconda's head. The friends ultimately complete their low-budget film, only to receive a cease and desist order from Sony that blocks any theatrical release. Griff and Clara end up married, while Doug is later approached by Jennifer Lopez, who also playing herself, who praises the movie and offers him the chance to direct a legitimate reboot. In a closing tease, Santiago is revealed to still be alive somewhere deep in the Amazon. The supporting cast includes Yanni Sky, Ben Lawson, Rui Ricardo Diaz, John Billingsley, Dan Silver, and Ron Smike. along with several actors playing the younger versions of the main characters. Jack Black's manic energy pairs nicely with Paul Rudd's calmer presence, creating an entertaining contrast, and Stephen Zahn and Thandai Newton each get standout moments. Daniela Melchior is serviceable in her role, and the surprise appearances by Ice Cube and Jennifer Lopez are sure to delight fans of the original film. While the 1997 Anaconda was accidentally funny, this reinterpretation embraces comedy on purpose, leaning heavily into meta jokes, visual gags, and playful one-liners. The scares rarely land and suspense is minimal, but that feels intentional. What results is a goofy, self-aware action-adventure horror comedy that doesn't take itself seriously, and honestly, that works in its favor. Remake announcements usually make long-time movie fans groan. Sometimes they succeed. A Star is Born, 2018, The Thing, 1982, True Grit, 2010. Other times they crash hard. A Psycho, 1998, Rollerball, 2002. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 2003. So when writer-director Tom Gormican, of The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, was announced as tackling Anaconda, the reaction wasn't outrage so much as confusion. Why revisit a film that barely qualifies as a cult classic? Once Jack Black and Paul Rudd were revealed as the leads, the intention became clearer. This isn't a straight remake. It's a comedic spin on a movie that already had unintentional humor baked into its DNA. The story centers on four childhood friends stuck in midlife stagnation who rediscover a VHS tape of a movie they made as kids. Watching it rekindles their creative spark, and they decide that remaking Anaconda is the perfect way to reclaim their lost passion. That questionable idea sends them into the Amazon, where they quickly stumble into a dangerous situation involving gold smugglers, shady operators, and of course, a man-eating snake. Chaos follows, bodies pile up, and ridiculousness ensues. It's silly, it's messy, it's self-aware, and while it may never be considered great, it's an entertaining, light-hearted tribute to a strange little corner of 90s creature feature history. Worth a watch. Tom Gormican teams up with Kevin Eaton to co-write and direct a boldly comedic reinterpretation of the 1997 creature feature, originally penned by Hans Bauer, Jim Cash, and Jack B. Sowards. Rather than offering a wink and nod parody, the filmmakers lean fully into absurd comedy. The movie sprinkles in affectionate nods to its predecessor, including playful references to Jennifer Lopez, Eric Stoltz, and even a cheeky jab at Jon Voight's famously strange accent. This brand of humor doesn't always land for me, but I have to admit I chuckled more than I expected, largely thanks to the charisma of the cast. Stephen Zahn, in particular, delivers a few genuinely sharp one-liners. At this point, most viewers will already know if this style of comedy suits their taste, or if it does, you might have some fun. If not, consider yourself warned. The original Anaconda, 1997, occupies a nostalgic corner of childhood for many. It was never high art, but it became a television staple where families and kids embraced its giant snake cozy, the jump scares, the familiar tropes, the pulpy thrills, and Jon Voight's gloriously exaggerated villain all fit neatly within the boundaries of crowd-pleasing cinema. Then came Anacondas, The Hunt for the Blood Orchid, a sequel that largely disappointed fans. Unfortunately, lightning doesn't strike twice. Here in 2025, the franchise stumbles again, and this time the misstep feels even more pronounced. The new film, headlined by Paul Rudd and Jack Black, presents itself as a meta reboot, but the execution is weak. The humor is thin, the tone overly silly, the visuals cheap, and the overall approach strangely immature. It plays less like a clever reinvention and more like a chaotic spoof that doesn't understand why the original worked. In spirit, it feels like a poor imitation of the Anaconda series. The story centers on four longtime friends: Doug, Jack Black, Griff, Paul Rudd, Kenny, Stephen Zahn, and Claire. Thandai Newton. Griff claims he owns the rights to Anaconda and convinces the group to remake the movie themselves. With none of them particularly thriving in life, they see this as a last-ditch opportunity and travel to the Amazon to shoot their project. Along the way they meet Daniela Melchior, the daughter of a boat operator, who joins the crew and is quickly positioned as the central figure, quietly pushing Griff and Clara into the background. Predictably, things go wrong, their prop snake goes missing, and soon enough a very real, very massive anaconda appears. Survival becomes the real objective. This version of Anaconda isn't exactly a sequel or a traditional remake, it's a self-aware comedy packed with callbacks, genre jokes, and references to other horror classics like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Characters even discuss the 1997 film the way modern fans might. On paper, this sounds clever. In practice, the jokes rarely land. What starts as playful satire quickly devolves into juvenile nonsense. Worse, the movie treats suspense, horror, and action as punchliners. There's no tension, no sense of danger, and no real reason to care. Eventually you stop helping for improvement and simply wait for the runtime to expire. The performances don't help me. It feels as though most of the cast is coasting. Paul Rudd's non-stop chatterbox routine and Jack Black's louder, more confident persona keep things mildly watchable, but neither actor reaches their comedic potential. Thandai Newton is fine, Steven Zahn does the bare minimum, and Daniela Melchior leaves little impression. Selton Mello is serviceable in his limited screen time. Cameos from Ice Cube and Jennifer Lopez offer a brief nostalgic spark, but even those moments feel oddly wasted. Technically, the film is passably with a reported budget around $45 million. It looks acceptable, if hardly impressive. Nigel Bluck's cinematography occasionally suffers from shaky camera work but mostly gets the job done, and at roughly 100 minutes, the pacing moves along briskly thanks to editing by Craig Alpert and Gregory Plotkin. Unfortunately none of that compensates for the grating screenplay and uninspired dialogue. The production design is decent, the score forgettable, and Gormican's direction feels uncertain. Some cult favorites are better left alone. If you're going to revisit them, you should approach them with care and respect. This film does neither. I never imagined I'd see Anaconda dragged through this much cinematic nonsense. Anaconda 2025 marks the 6th entry in the franchise and functions as a meta-reboot following a group of friends attempting to recreate a beloved movie from their youth, only to encounter real danger in the jungle. I went in optimistic because of the cast and creative team, expecting a breezy, turn-your-brain-off experience. Instead, I walked away feeling mostly indifferent. One genuine positive is the core concept of the early setup works reasonably well and briefly evokes a modernized Tropic Thunder vibe. The idea of characters openly acknowledging that they're participating in a reboot is interesting and initially feels fresh, but sadly the film never builds on that promise. I really enjoyed the ensemble here, especially Paul Rudd, Jack Black, Steven Zahn, Thandai Newton, and Daniela Melchior is this oddball group of longtime friends trying to make a movie together. Rudd and Black in particular have solid on-screen rapport as childhood buddies who reunite with dreams of creating their own Anaconda reboot. Their back and forth feels natural, and much of the humor lands nicely. The snake itself is also convincing, whether achieved through practical effects or CGI, and the nods to cast members from the 1997 film are a fun bonus for longtime fans. That said, there are some noticeable shortcomings. Even though the setup is promising, the film rarely pushes its concept in interesting directions and instead coasts along familiar beats. Strangely, there are stretches where the pacing drags, which isn't something you'd expect from a movie about people being hunted by a giant snake. While it's advertised as a horror comedy, the emphasis leans heavily toward jokes, leaving the horror elements feeling undercooked and occasionally toothless. Some comedic moments also fall flat, and at times it feels like the performers are being held back from fully cutting loose. There's also a strange sense that the movie lacks a strong authorial voice. It doesn't really feel like a passion project driven by a filmmaker with a clear vision, but more like a studio-shaped product that's been sanded down to avoid risks. Because of that, Anaconda 2025 ends up as an okay genre mashup that gets a few things right, yet ultimately feels disappointing. It's another reminder of why I often find myself frustrated with Sony's output. This reboot also makes me curious what the original pitch might have looked like compared to what we actually got. I didn't actively dislike the film, it's too mild to inspire that level of reaction, but it's also not sharp or clever enough to truly stand out. The story follows Griff, a struggling actor in Los Angeles, and Doug, who earns a living making wedding videos. When Griff returns home for Doug's birthday, he reveals he's secured the rights to the original Anaconda and proposes a low-budget remake with their old friend Claire. Along with cameraman Kenny Trent and local snake handler Santiago, they travel to the Amazon to begin filming, only to realize a real, massive anaconda is lurking nearby and may have taken an interest in them. On paper, it sounds like a great premise. In execution, it feels oddly muted. Some of this may stem from territory Jack Black has explored before, whether parodying low-budget filmmaking or playing overzealous creatives. There's also a sense that the movie is overly respectful toward both the studio's system and the original Anaconda, which itself is famous for being so bad it's good. The biggest flaw, though, is that the film simply isn't funny nor UFO. It often confuses pointing out cliché copyrights with actually satirizing them, as if being self-aware is sufficient on its own. A subplot involving Daniela Melchior's character, Anna, the mysterious boat captain who's also fleeing armed pursuers, feels especially underdeveloped. She doesn't get enough meaningful screen time before things spiral into chaos, which makes her storyline feel half-formed. The cameos are pleasant, but they mostly amount to brief appearances rather than fully realized comedic moments. By the end, I'm left unsure whether a sharper, more daring script existed at an earlier stage and was gradually watered down, or whether the concept alone was expected to carry the film. Either way, the final product is underwhelming, even if it never becomes outright terrible. Where Anaconda 2025 does succeed is in recognizing why the original film developed a cult following and attempting to refine that appeal. Unlike the 1997 movie, which became funny largely by accident, this version clearly aims for intentional comedy. The humor is generally approachable, playful, and designed to work for a wide audience. The first half is pleasant and serviceable, hovering in decent but unremarkable territory as it sets up characters and tone. Then, once the story fully embraces absurdity in the latter half, the movie becomes far more entertaining. When it finally commits to the madness, the laughs start coming more frequently. The slapstick, the animal-driven chaos, and the wildly exaggerated problem-solving are better timed, with a few standout gags that genuinely caught me off guard. Paul Rudd and Jack Black proved to be inspired casting choices, bringing charm, self-awareness, and strong comedic instincts that help keep the movie afloat even when it veers into total silliness. In the end, Anaconda 2025 is a mixed bag, occasionally funny, intermittently engaging, but never quite as bold or clever as its premise suggests. The surprise appearances by Jennifer Lopez and Ice Cube are easily one of the film's biggest highlights, playful nods to the franchise's past that feel warm and well-earned without becoming overindulgent. This movie isn't pretending to be high art. It knows exactly what it wants to be, a silly, energetic crowd pleaser. And in that regard it mostly delivers. It's a legacy sequel that finally seems to understand why people remember these films in the first place. That said, this is still a strange way to bring back a property that began in 1997. Now headlined by Jack Black and Paul Rudd, The story centers on two longtime friends bonded by their shared obsession with horror movies. During a birthday gathering with their equally eccentric pals, played by Thandai Newton and Stephen Zahn, Black's character pitches an outrageous idea: remake Anaconda by actually traveling to Brazil and using a real snake, funding this absurd dream by gambling with a home mortgage. Predictably, everything that could go wrong eventually does. Things grow even messier when Daniela Melchior's character tags along, fleeing from a group of criminals. From that point forward, the film stacks complication upon complication, clearly aiming for non-stop laughs. Unfortunately, the comedy rarely reaches that goal. I found myself genuinely laughing only once, and that moment already appeared in the trailer, which doesn't inspire much confidence for viewers expecting wall-to-wall humor. I do, however, have a soft spot for movies set in faraway, dangerous environments. I have zero desire to ever set foot in the Amazon rainforest, so cinema is my preferred way to experience it. Because of that, I went into Anaconda 2025 with cautious curiosity. While the film feels uneven and occasionally unsure of itself, it ultimately stumbles its way into being a fairly enjoyable 99-minute ride. The cast is easily the film's strongest asset. It's difficult to dislike a movie with so many naturally charming performers. Each actor seems well matched to their role, and their collective chemistry holds the whole thing together, even when the narrative starts wobbling. Without them, this movie would collapse entirely. Story-wise, things are serviceable at best. The setup gives these ordinary people a plausible excuse to venture into the jungle, but it doesn't generate as many fun scenarios as it should. The criminal subplot in particular feels unnecessary and mostly slows the momentum, adding very little beyond extra noise. When it comes to the snake itself, the movie doesn't hold back. The creature sequences lean aggressively into chaos, and the jump scares are extremely loud and frequent, bordering on excessive. Viewers sensitive to sudden audio spikes should prepare themselves. Still, some of the creature moments are creative, including an especially memorable scene involving a spider bite and its bizarre aftermath. That sequence feels like a throwback to the kind of outrageous gags that populated studio comedies in the early 2000s, and it genuinely works. Overall, I had a decent time with this one. It functions as both a horror-tinged adventure and a broad comedy, finding a workable middle ground between the two. Rather than presenting itself as a serious monster movie, Anaconda 2025 reimagines the franchise in a self-aware, tongue-in-cheek way, packing in enough humor and heart to justify its runtime. The movie also carries strong early 2000s comedy energy, particularly reminiscent of Tropic Thunder, thanks to its meta-premise and Jack Black's presence. Black brings his usual enthusiasm while Paul Rudd remains effortlessly likable even when his character behaves selfishly. Thandai Newton, Stephen Zahn, and Selton Mello all get moments to stand out, though Daniela Melchior is unfortunately underused, largely confined to a quiet, guarded role. The opening stretch is weak and fails to establish the tension it aims for, but once director Tom Gormican leans fully into comedy, the film grows more confident. The self-referential jokes about filmmaking and Hollywood excess often land better than the broader slapstick. The CGI snake looks solid enough, and shooting in an actual jungle adds an authenticity that green screens simply can't replicate. Ultimately, this version of Anaconda will likely surprise fans expecting a traditional creature feature revival. It prioritizes laughs over scares and embraces parody over suspense. While the original film had its own brand of campy menace, this reboot knowingly trades that for absurdity. Even so, despite Jack Black and Paul Rudd sharing top billing, their chemistry doesn't quite reach the level one might hope for. A missed opportunity in an otherwise passable, self-aware reboot. Although both lead performers are widely praised for their comedic instincts and strong on-screen charisma, this film strangely keeps them on a tight leash. It never truly lets either actor cut loose, and as a result much of the comedy feels muted. Instead of sharp or memorable laughs, the jokes often land in the realm of predictable silliness, giving the movie a comfortable but uninspired personality. You can sense the filmmakers aiming for humor, but too often the punchlines fizzle rather than pop. One of the film's biggest weaknesses lies in its writing. The tone constantly wavers, unsure whether it wants to function as an affectionate tribute, a spoof, or a light horror adventure. Because it never fully commits to any of these directions, the narrative lacks a strong backbone the attention struggles to build, and whenever the story starts to flirt with danger, it quickly deflates itself with gags that feel more obligatory than natural. The visual effects don't help matters. The computer-generated snakes, especially the massive Anaconda, look noticeably synthetic. Their exaggerated size and glossy texture make them feel closer to animated creations than living threats. Instead of inspiring fear, the creature often looks exaggerated to the point of absurdity, which further weakens the suspense. Compared with modern creature features, the visuals feel undercooked and somewhat rushed. Still, the movie isn't entirely without redeeming qualities. The supporting cast injects occasional sparks of energy, and there's a late sequence that leans heavily into nostalgia in a way that actually works. For a brief moment, the film taps into the spirit that made the original memorable, reminding viewers why the concept once had such appeal. In the end, Anaconda 2025 doesn't collapse into disaster, but it also never rises to the level of a meaningful comeback. It's a lightly amusing, easily forgettable diversion, as something acceptable for a lazy night at home, but hardly essential viewing or theater-worthy. The film stars Jack Black, a Minecraft movie, Jumanji, Paul Rudd, Ant-Man, Anchorman, Thandai Newton, Westworld, Mission Impossible 2, and Steven Zahn, Chad Powers, The Ridiculous Six. The story follows a group of childhood friends who reunite with the odd goal of remaking one of their favorite movies from 1997, Anaconda. Jack plays a wedding videographer who dreams of making a real film but has never caught his big break. Paul portrays an underemployed actor whose proudest credit so far is appearing as a background extra on a TV show. The two once made amateur movies together as kids, and one of those early projects even surfaces here. Paul claims to have access to the rights for Anaconda and convinces Jack to take the director's chair. They recruit Thandai as their leading lady and bring Steven aboard as a producer, both of whom also appeared in their childhood filmmaking days. The production begins with a supposedly manageable snake provided by a handler, but when that plan falls apart, the group is forced to search for another option. Their hunt leads them deep into the jungle, where they quickly realize they've wandered into a far more dangerous situation than anticipated. Running alongside this plot is a secondary storyline involving criminals searching for hidden gold, along with surprise appearances from two actors connected to the original Anaconda near the final stretch. The movie operates as a self-aware, tongue-in-cheek riff on the concept of recreating a cult favorite on almost no budget. It even throws in cameos from Ice Cube and Jennifer Lopez for extra meta flavor. The crew heads into the Amazon hoping to craft their own version of Anaconda, only for chaos to strike early when their initial snake is accidentally killed. Meanwhile, their riverboat captain seems to have shady figures on his trail. Eventually a colossal Anaconda surfaces, attacking with little mercy. A few action beats stand out, particularly a sequence involving a camper van assault and another chase through a film set with a golf cart. Along the way, secrets come to light and it becomes clear not everyone is being honest. The humor can feel forced at times, and the runtime might have benefited from trimming a short chunk. The film is directed by Tom Gormican, who co-wrote the screenplay with Kevin Eaton. When I first heard about the project, I was disappointed. As a fan of the 1997 original, I'd hoped for a more straightforward remake. Still, my appreciation for Jack Black, Paul Rudd, and Steven Zahn convinced me to approach it with an open mind. What I found was a slightly above-average comedy adventure. It isn't great, and it certainly isn't franchise-defining, but it offers a few laughs and some light entertainment. I wouldn't really call this a remake, and it doesn't feel like a true continuation of the series, so it's better viewed as a playful side experiment that borrows the name and concept. This film plays less like a straight remake and more like a playful riff on the 1997 cult favorite. The cast commits to their roles, but thin character arcs and a story that never truly centers on them leave the whole experience feeling scattered, as if the movie can't quite decide whether it wants to stand on its own as a reboot or lean fully into parody territory. Clocking in at around 92 minutes, the runtime feels appropriate on paper, though it still overstays its welcome just a bit. The pacing is mostly serviceable, but certain sections feel stretched longer than necessary. That said, there's a steady stream of action, a handful of genuine laughs, and a fun surprise cameo from Ice Cube that longtime fans of the original will appreciate. The movie finds a decent rhythm balancing comedy and action, even if the horror elements are noticeably dialed down. The closing moments land nicely, and while it isn't a serious reimagining of the franchise, it's watchable enough. Ideally, we'll eventually get a proper remake that treats the concept with more sincerity. For now, this one lands somewhere in the pleasantly average zone. If you approach it as light entertainment rather than a true revival, you may walk away satisfied. Big studios love corporate satire these days, and this feels like Sony's attempt to jump into that trend with a self-aware spin on a famously pulpy monster movie. On paper, a cast featuring Paul Rudd, Jack Black, Steven Zahn, Thandai Newton, and Daniela Melchior sounds like comedy gold, but the film never quite sustains comedic momentum. There are scattered highlights: a homemade monster movie sequence from childhood, a silly bit involving a boar, a cheeky nod to Alien, and a few unsurprising cameos, but unfortunately the connective tissue between these moments is fairly bland. With this level of comedic talent, the jokes should be consistently landing, and too often they don't. The CGI Anaconda is serviceable but uninspired, charging through scenery with the subtlety of a rampaging dinosaur. There's also a gold mining storyline that feels underdeveloped and largely unnecessary. Still, the final stretch is entertaining enough to leave a reasonably positive impression. The story follows Doug, Griff, Kenny, and Claire, childhood friends who bonded over movies. Doug once dreamed of directing but now films weddings, while Griff struggles to find steady acting work. When Griff claims he's secured the rights to Anaconda, the group heads to Brazil to shoot what they envision as a spiritual successor. They bring along Santiago, a supposed snake expert, and cross paths with Anna, who's hiding from illegal miners. Unbeknownst to them, a massive anaconda is already terrorizing the jungle they plan to use as their set. Their attempt to make a movie quickly turns into a fight for survival. The concept has potential, but the execution doesn't fully capitalize on it. The meta jokes often feel like low-hanging fruit, and the humor swings wildly between effective and flat. The snake's big entrance lacks proper build-up, and the script leans heavily into predictability. The cameos, despite being heavily marketed, are underutilized. Given how sharp the unbearable weight of massive talent was, expectations for Tom Gormican's follow-up were understandably high. Sadly, even with a strong cast, the writing doesn't give them enough to work with. The subplot involving illegal miners feels unfinished, and the film would have benefited from focusing more on the chaotic production of the in-universe movie. Likes: light-hearted, fast-moving tone, occasional clever jokes, fun cameo appearances, enjoyable music, simple, undemanding entertainment. Summary: Anaconda isn't aiming for narrative depth, and that's fine, but the pacing and structure don't always support its breezy intentions. The movie relies heavily on comedy to carry a very basic story, turning the jungle into a playground of slapstick, banter, and meta-commentary. It pokes fun at Hollywood reboots while simultaneously being one, which is amusing in theory, even if the execution is inconsistent. You'll find one-liners, puns, nostalgic winks, and brief cameo appearances sprinkled throughout as some land, others don't. Overall it's a mildly amusing adventure that works best when expectations are kept low. Not a standout, but not a disaster either, or just a serviceable, parody-style spin on a beloved cult classic. I've always had a soft spot for movies with energetic soundtracks, and this new take on Anaconda definitely leans into that strength. The music lineup bounces across different styles, and most of the time those tracks pair surprisingly well with what's happening on screen. The result is a kind of audio-visual harmony that pushes the entertainment factor higher than it probably should. So what's the bottom line? The movie is unapologetically goofy, and in certain moods that actually works. So sometimes you just want something light, ridiculous, and stress-free, and Anaconda fits that role nicely. The cast clearly embraces the silliness, going all in on exaggerated performances, and if you arrive expecting dumb fun and easy laughs, chances are you'll walk away satisfied. That said, there are some obvious weak points. The storyline is thin, the visual effects feel dated, the characters lack depth, genuine scares are scarce, there's not nearly enough snake-driven tension, and the comedy often overwhelms everything else. Even an only silly movie still benefits from solid foundations, and that's where this remake struggles. The plot is extremely basic. It experiments with a meta-style concept that partially lands but then tries to mix in heavier story beats that feel unnecessary and underdeveloped. These extra elements don't add much and mostly serve as distractions. Character writing is another issue here because the film leans so heavily into self-aware humor. Most of the personalities feel shallow. Dialogue is delivered with exaggerated emphasis and sitcom-style timing, which makes the characters feel more like caricatures than people. They're amusing, but rarely engaging beyond the joke. Visually, the CGI leaves a lot to be desired. While there's obvious effort behind the effects, the creature animation often carries a low-budget, made-for-TV vibe, with textures and movements that sometimes veer into cartoon territory. That may have been intentional, but in an era when digital effects can look stunning, it feels like a missed opportunity. Anyone hoping for a tense horror adventure should adjust expectations early. The film occasionally hints at a haunted atmosphere, but those moments are quickly drowned out by constant punchlines. Without sustained danger or suspense, the movie loses much of what once defined the franchise. The snake itself doesn't appear as often as you'd expect, and the body count is surprisingly small instead of being a looming threat. The creature often feels like a comedic accessory. So yes, the movie is arguably too silly, and that excess humor ultimately weakens the experience. Final verdict: this version of Anaconda delivers exactly what it advertises: so escapist entertainment. It's straightforward, noisy, and packed with jokes, embracing its identity as a lightweight jungle romp. The soundtrack is enjoyable, the pacing is brisk, and it's easy to watch without much mental investment. However, toning down the comedy and adding more substance to the characters and narrative would have gone a long way. The film juggles too many half-baked ideas, and stripping away the strong hunter versus prey tension removes the edge that once made these movies exciting. The end result feels messy, overly constructed, and oddly sanitized, especially for a franchise built on danger and spectacle. Would I suggest seeing it in theaters? Probably not, unless you're desperate for pure escapism. On a positive note, the movie succeeds as a comedy-inspired reimagining. The premise of a crew attempting to create a reboot within the story is amusing, even if it isn't fully explored. There's also a side plot involving stolen gold that never really pays off, but it's harmless. The humor lands often enough, with several genuinely funny moments scattered throughout. Performances are solid across the board, and while the snake's CGI isn't impressive, it's serviceable. It's also fun to see Jack Black and Steven Zahn sharing the screen again after playing lovable idiots together decades ago. They reunite here as older, still charming goofballs, and their chemistry remains intact. Some might argue this movie is yet another sign that Hollywood is scraping the bottom of the barrel for ideas, but honestly, it still manages to be an entertaining ride. The four central characters are, by most standards, a group of lovable underachievers, yet they're easy to root for, and you genuinely worry about their safety as they venture into the jungle to make what is essentially a low-budget DIY revival of Anaconda, only to discover they've walked into something far more dangerous than expected. The surprise cameo appearances by Ice Cube and Jennifer Lopez near the end are a fun nod to the past and add an extra layer of amusement. My biggest personal issue is the heavy reliance on jump scares combined with the fact that I absolutely cannot stand snakes. Still, I went in with fairly modest expectations. A self-aware reboot of Anaconda was never going to redefine the genre, so it makes sense that this version lands roughly in the same territory as the original, just approached from a more openly comedic angle. Instead of leaning into accidental silliness, the film embraces intentional humor. It has a lively, chaotic energy that, while sometimes stretched thin, often masks its slower moments with big, exaggerated jokes that hit hard and fast. Director Tom Gormican handles the material competently, navigating muddy waters and dense jungle environments at a steady pace. Much of the film's momentum, though, comes from its cast. Jack Black and Paul Rudd are reliably entertaining, bringing their familiar comedic rhythms and charm to their roles. This new take on Anaconda doesn't reinvent creature feature cinema, and at times it feels like the whole production could wander off course, but it ultimately delivers exactly what it advertises: goofy, fun, over-the-top set pieces, well-chosen music drops, knowingly cheesy snake effects, and a light layer of self-awareness. And honestly, I still want a full release of the Quake on Blu-ray. That fictional movie within the movie sounds like a masterpiece in its own right. This reboot reimagines the 1997 film as a comedy rather than a straight horror story. Tom Gormican directs, co-writes, and produces, following up on his work on The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. Paul Rudd plays Ronald Griffin Jr., a struggling actor who never quite broke into leading man status and survives on minor supporting roles. His former creative partner, Doug Mallister, Jack Black, once dreamed of directing big movies but now makes wedding videos for a living. As teenagers, they used to shoot silly homemade films together, and Ronald becomes convinced that reviving their old Anaconda fan project could be their big chance. Along with a small group of friends, they head into the Amazon, confident they can pull off a shoestring budget reboot using a handful of stunts and clever tricks. That plan quickly collapses when they encounter a real anaconda, and their goofy passion project turns into a legitimate fight for survival. The creators clearly aim to transform the original monster movie into a comedy-first experience. That tonal shift may be difficult for some viewers, especially fans who remember the original films as straight-faced thrillers, even if they weren't particularly good. The later sequels already flirted with unintentional humor, but this version goes all in on comedy, pushing horror elements into the background. Unfortunately, the humor itself feels unfocused. Either the movie juggles parody, meta jokes, and outright spoofing without committing to a single style, which can make the experience feel scattered rather than consistently funny. The narrative also suffers from this looseness. Certain characters exist mainly to push events along, vanish for long stretches, and then pop back in when convenient. There's an attempt to explore themes of regret and missed potential, but those ideas get buried beneath the chaotic comedic approach. Visually, the film relies almost entirely on CGI for the snake, which keeps the creature from ever feeling truly real, and the anaconda doesn't appear until fairly late in the runtime, sometimes making the movie feel more like a generic jungle comedy than an actual anaconda reboot. Compared with the original's use of animatronics, which at least provided some tangible presence, this version feels more artificial. Because of the uneven structure, none of the cast members are given enough space to truly shine, and it becomes hard to form a strong emotional attachment to any of them. Realistically, there probably wasn't a huge audience begging for another Anaconda movie in the first place. Even as someone who enjoys cheesy creature features, I've always found the franchise more mildly amusing than genuinely memorable. This reboot doesn't change that status, but it does manage to offer a silly, occasionally fun spin on an old concept. Nothing more, nothing less. The idea of resurrecting a franchise that's been quiet for years usually sounds like a bad planner on paper. A new Anaconda movie feels unnecessary, if not outright ridiculous. What makes this entry surprisingly effective, though, is that the filmmakers seem fully aware of how absurd the whole concept is. There's a self-awareness baked into the project that constantly winks at the audience, as if everyone involved knows that being passionately devoted to the Anaconda series is, frankly, a little silly. The core concept alone is hilariously over the top. A group of middle-aged fans of the 1997 original venture into the wilderness to create their own reboot. It's a ridiculous setup, but once the film gets past a slightly uneven first 15 to 20 minutes, it starts to find its rhythm. For some viewers, this may easily rank as the dumbest movie of the year, and I'm fairly certain that's intentional if that was the goal. The movie absolutely nails it. Pairing Jack Black, Paul Rudd, and Steven Zahn in an unapologetically goofy horror comedy feels like inspired casting. All three have proven comedic instincts, and watching them bounce off each other in such an unhinged setting is a major highlight. Big, silly studio comedies don't hit theaters very often anymore, so maybe I'm more forgiving than usual, but I genuinely laughed more during this movie than in most releases this year. The humor comes from a mix of quotable lines, visual jokes, and pure nonsense. While the overall storyline follows a fairly predictable path, the film sprinkles in enough oddball turns and small surprises to keep things entertaining. There are moments where the editing feels a bit rough, suggesting a rushed post-production process, but even in its weaker stretches, the movie remains enjoyable. One of the film's biggest strengths is its tonal balance. It embraces the stupidity of its characters while also playing with familiar horror tropes, without tipping into parody overload or turning into a spoof in the style of the Scary Movie series. Fans of the original Anaconda will also notice a few fun cameos, and yes, sticking around for the credits is worth it, since some of the best jokes are tucked away at the very end. Is this a good movie in a traditional critical sense? Probably not, but it is wildly entertaining. In a year packed with safer, more formulaic releases, this oddball Anaconda stands out as one of the more memorable cinematic experiences of 2025. It's strangely compelling, a comedy within a franchise that was never meant to be comedic, simultaneously dumb and oddly clever. It's meta in a way that suggests the filmmakers don't fully respect the source material, yet still find something amusing in playing with it. At times it even looks like a high-budget cable channel production, and somehow that adds to its charm. I watched this with friends in the theater, and that setting absolutely enhanced the experience. The movie thrives on shared laughter, awkward silences, and collective "what did we just watch" reactions. It's packed with strange, uncomfortable, and darkly funny moments that land precisely because they come out of nowhere. As a comedy, Anaconda throws everything at the wall: dark jokes, absurd scenarios, bizarre character interactions. The story follows a group of friends attempting to reboot Anaconda, only to stumble into situations that leave them increasingly exposed and vulnerable. Something I really appreciated. The unpredictability of certain scenes gives the film extra energy, as events often unfold without much warning, which makes the chaos feel more authentic. The cast is another strong point. Jack Black alone is reason enough to give this movie a chance. He remains one of my favorite comedians, and his presence instantly elevates the material. Paul Rudd brings his usual charm and likability, making his character an essential glue holding the group together. Steven Zahn fits perfectly as a quirky supporting player who rounds out the Friends dynamic, while Thandai Newton adds a charismatic edge that helps complete the ensemble. When I first saw the trailer, I was sold on the premise of two washed-up friends, one a failed director, the other a failed actor trying to reinvent the 1997 Anaconda in the Amazon. I expected a clever meta spin on the original. What we ultimately get, in my view, is a glimpse into what Jack Black, Paul Rudd, and modern Hollywood consider funny in 2025 and 2026. It won't work for everyone, but for me it was chaotic, stupid, and endlessly amusing in the best possible way. Jack Black's brand of humor felt sharp and inspired a couple of decades ago, but these days he mostly seems to recycle an exaggerated version of himself in every role. Paul Rudd, on the other hand, remains naturally likable, though this film, like some of his recent franchise work, doesn't feel like a strong step forward for his career. Hollywood's growing reluctance to gamble on original ideas is painfully obvious here, as studios continue to lean on endless sequels, spin-offs, and nostalgia-driven projects aimed at a shrinking theatrical audience. The storytelling is messy and unevenly assembled, taking nearly an hour before anything truly engaging happens. Comedy is supposed to be a major selling point, yet genuine laughs are rarer. I can count only a handful of moments that even earned a mild chuckle. Most of the characters are thinly sketched and defined by a single trait, with the notable exception of Steven Zahn, who easily delivers the most entertaining performance in the film. The surprise appearances feel squandered, the music is forgettable, and the snake itself barely makes a strong impression. Ironically, the creature effects from the original film, nearly 3 decades ago, were more convincing. At this stage, I find myself increasingly disconnected from mainstream releases. So strangely enough, even something like Anaconda 3, Offspring, with David Hasselhoff, managed to be more amusing, and that wasn't even trying to be clever. That said, I finally sat down to watch the newest Anaconda featuring Jack Black and Paul Rudd, and here are my honest thoughts. The movie flirts slightly with horror but mostly positions itself as an action comedy. I expected a much stronger comedic presence given the cast and concept, but instead it delivers occasional humor rather than consistent laughs. Still, there's some enjoyable action, and it occasionally channels the spirit of the 1997 Anaconda with Jennifer Lopez and Ice Cube. Watching Black and Rudd bounce off each other does provide some entertainment, and seeing a massive snake slither around and chomp on unlucky victims has its own guilty pleasure appeal. It's simple fun, even if it's not especially memorable. After the roller coaster that was 2025, audiences might feel tempted to check out this oddball reimagining of Anaconda. While it isn't technically a remake or reboot due to rights limitations, it functions as an original adventure that borrows heavily from the cult favorites. In truth, it leans more toward parody than reinvention. Jack Black plays Doug Mallister, a man who sees himself as a legendary creative genius, while Paul Rudd portrays Ronald Griffin Jr., a struggling actor who never quite achieved stardom. This marks the first time the two longtime collaborators truly share center stage together. The film was shot in Australia's Queensland region, using lush natural locations to stand in for the Amazon rainforest, and visually those environments provide a nice backdrop. A word of warning: skipping the trailer might improve your experience, as it reveals far too much. There are also a couple of amusing cameos from actors associated with the original film, plus a small end credits surprise worth sticking around for. This entry is technically the 6th installment inspired by the franchise, but it's easily the most overtly comedic and self-aware of the bunch. Rather than offering a straightforward remake, director Tom Gormican presents a playful, meta take on the idea of fandom. The story centers on a group of friends who once dreamed of remaking their favorite jungle thriller, only to find themselves living through a version of it. Doug is trapped in a monotonous job filming weddings, while Griff is stuck on the fringes of Hollywood success. Alongside Clara and Kenny, played by Thandai Newton and Steven Zahn, they embark on a half-baked expedition armed with a script, minimal resources, and maximum nostalgia. Of course, things spiral out of control when smugglers, eccentric hunters, and a very real giant snake enter the picture. The movie keeps everything fairly safe, but its goofy tone, intentionally cheesy creature effects, and non-stop stream of absurd scenarios give it a certain charm. It feels like a love letter to the loud, silly adventure films of the 1990s, even if not every joke lands. Still, enough of them do to make this one of the more amusing, occasionally inappropriate comedies of the year. When you decide to revive an old property, the bare minimum should be assembling a cast people actually want to spend time with.